I had the need to speak to the person who was responsible for circumcising me as an infant. I started by contacting the earliest doctor I knew in my recollection, which was a Dr. Scalatar, who was my pediatrician. And I remember him quite distinctly. And I went to his offices that still exist, even though he's retired, and I left a message at his offices that if he would contact me as something I'd like to discuss with him. And a few months went by and I never received a phone call. So using some investigative techniques, I tracked down his home address and home telephone number. And I called him. And when I called him, he remembered me quite distinctly. He remembered my family. And I asked him if he was the one who circumcised me. And he said, no, he wasn't. Pediatricians generally don't do circumcisions. He explained it was the obstetricians that had that job. The way he put it, it was the obstetricians, that was their line of work. That was their, that's what part of their bread and butter, if you will. He also told me that the medical profession tends to change things over time, and what their practices were in the past, they're often revised, and what they've done in the past, because they thought it was a good idea, after studies come out, and they realize it wasn't such a good idea. So he said, well, circumcision was promoted in the past. Now these days, a lot of doctors realize that it's not such a great idea. We finished off our conversation with some niceties and we exchanged pleasantries, and then I realized that I had to continue on with my job of finding who the person was. So this time now, armed with more knowledge, I looked at my birth certificate and found who the obstetrician was, because usually the person who delivers you is listed on the birth certificate. So armed with that, I then commenced a new search, and I found the obstetrician's address and home telephone number. And I proceeded to call him, and was a little bit apprehensive because I wasn't quite sure what was the best way to start the conversation, and also not let emotions take over, but have a thought-provoking and logical conversation. So I called him, and he identified himself, and he identified himself to me. He was an obstetrician, and with his name, it was Dr. I'm not going to say his name right now, but you know, he remembered my family. He remembered my parents quite distinctly. He remembered me and my brother, and I asked him what it was like to tie me down and cut off part of my body. I asked him how it made him feel, and he didn't have any response. I asked him, was I screaming when he did it? Did I scream? And he didn't have any response. And I asked him, did he have my consent to do it? And he didn't have any response. And I wanted him to know how deeply his actions affected me, that he violated my rights. And I wanted him to know that if he thought he did a good thing, he didn't do a good thing. He caused a lot of harm. And again, he gave me no response. other than to say, keep going, I'm listening. So I wanted to provoke some kind of response from him. So I asked him, when he turned the screw on the Gomco clamp, and when I screamed out in pain, I asked him, did that make you feel like more of a man to do that to me when I was 8 pounds as an infant? And he had no response. So that's pretty much how our conversation concluded. He had nothing to say. He couldn't offer any reasons why it was done. And he didn't seem to be very empathetic to the situation. So we concluded again with some pleasantries, and I did thank him for taking the time to listen to me and not hang up. But it was important for me to have closure on the issue, to have the opportunity to speak to the man who actually did this to me, and at least to associate him and his voice and associate a person to the scar that was on my body that he was responsible for. And I would recommend that for any man that feels so affected by circumcision having been done to them without their consent, that they have the courage to try to find who the doctor was and let them know how that doctor's actions affected you. Because many doctors feel that if there's no complaint, there's no harm. And many men, by the time they're able to confront this issue, so much time has gone by that perhaps the doctor is no longer walking the face of this earth. So my recommendation to anyone would be, once they've reached that point where they're ready to talk about it with the person who did it, that they waste no time in doing it. Because I was lucky. I was able to find this person, and I was lucky that he was still alive. He was 88 years old when I called him. And that was 2 years ago. I don't know if he's still around anymore. But certainly his days are short. So I think that's my story, and I hope others can use this to their benefit and draw strength from it.